Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me today as we examine what may prove to be one of the most consequential diplomatic visits in recent Asian-Pacific history. President Donald Trump's arrival in Tokyo marks a pivotal moment not just for United States-Japan relations, but for the entire architecture of global trade and security in the Indo-Pacific region. Let me take you through what we're witnessing right now. After departing from Malaysia, President Trump touched down in Japan with an agenda that goes far beyond ceremonial handshakes and photo opportunities. This visit comes at a time when the global economic order is being fundamentally reshaped, and Japan finds itself at a critical crossroads. The aircraft carrying the American delegation landed at a moment when both nations are grappling with profound questions about their futures, their partnership, and their place in an increasingly multipolar world. The timing here is absolutely crucial. Japan has a new Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi, who represents a fresh chapter in Japanese leadership. She's known for her nationalist views and her commitment to strengthening Japan's defense capabilities. This is her first major meeting with President Trump, and the chemistry between these two leaders will set the tone for years of cooperation or potential friction ahead. First impressions in diplomacy matter enormously. The body language, the tone, the willingness to listen and compromise. All of these subtle signals get transmitted to bureaucrats, business leaders, and citizens in both countries, who will ultimately determine whether grand agreements translate into real-world cooperation. Prime Minister Takaichi comes from the conservative wing of the Liberal Democratic Party. She's been a protege of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who had a remarkably strong working relationship with President Trump during his first term. Abe understood how to navigate Trump's personality and negotiating style. He mixed flattery with substance, personal rapport with hard bargaining. Takaichi will be looking to replicate that successful formula, but she brings her own style and priorities to the table. She's more hawkish on defense issues than some of her predecessors. She's been vocal about the China threat. She's committed to revising Japan's pacifist constitution to allow for a more robust military posture. All of these positions align well with the Trump administration's regional strategy, which could create a foundation for deep cooperation. Now, let's talk about what's really on the table. According to multiple reports, Japan has come prepared with something substantial, a massive investment package directed toward the United States. We're talking about billions of dollars potentially flowing into American infrastructure, manufacturing, and technology sectors. The exact figures haven't been confirmed, but sources suggest we could be looking at commitments in the range of $50 to $100 billion spread over 5 to 10 years. To put that in perspective, that's roughly equivalent to the entire annual budget of a mid-sized American state. This isn't charity. This is strategic negotiation at the highest level. Japan wants something in return, and that something is tariff relief. President Trump has made tariffs a cornerstone of his trade policy since his first day in office during his first term, and he's continued that approach into his current presidency. He views tariffs as leverage, as tools to extract concessions, as ways to protect American industries and workers. Japan has been feeling the pressure from these policies. Japanese automakers, who have massive operations both in Japan and the United States, have been particularly concerned. Companies like Toyota, Honda, Nissan, and Mazda employ hundreds of thousands of workers across both countries. They've built intricate supply chains that span the Pacific. Tariffs disrupt those chains, raise costs, create uncertainty, and ultimately could force difficult decisions about where to invest and where to produce. Electronics manufacturers face similar challenges. Sony, Panasonic, Toshiba, and dozens of smaller firms export significant volumes to the American market. Steel and aluminum producers have been hit by tariffs that Trump imposed, citing national security concerns. Even Japanese agricultural exports, though smaller in volume, face barriers that Japanese farmers and politicians want reduced. What we're likely seeing here is a grand bargain. Japan invests heavily in American jobs and infrastructure, demonstrating their commitment to the American economy and American workers. And in exchange, they get preferential access to American markets with reduced tariff burdens. Think about what this means for both economies. For the United States, this could mean tens of thousands of new jobs, particularly in manufacturing sectors that have struggled in recent decades. Imagine announcements of new automotive plants in Michigan, Ohio, or the Carolinas. Picture advanced semiconductor fabrication facilities being built in Arizona or Texas. Envision robotics research centers, battery production lines, and high-speed rail projects all funded or co-funded by Japanese capital. These aren't just jobs, they're often high-paying jobs with benefits. The kind of employment that builds middle-class communities and generates tax revenue for local and state governments. For Japan, this means securing their economic relationship with their most important ally while gaining competitive advantages over other Asian exporters, particularly China and South Korea. If Japanese companies get tariff relief that Chinese companies don't, that's a massive advantage. If Japanese products can enter the American market more easily than Korean products, that shifts competitive dynamics across multiple industries. Japan is essentially buying insurance against economic decoupling from the United States while simultaneously weakening the position of their regional rivals. But we need to examine the details carefully because the devil is always in the details. What exactly will Japan invest in? Will it be greenfield investments, meaning brand new factories and facilities built from scratch? Or will it be acquisitions of existing American companies? Greenfield investments create more new jobs but take longer to materialize. Acquisitions happen faster but don't necessarily create as many new positions. Will these investments be concentrated in a few states or spread across the country? The geographic distribution matters enormously for political reasons. Senators and representatives from states that get major investments will become champions of the U.S.-Japan relationship. Those whose states don't benefit might remain skeptical. What about the tariff relief? Will it be comprehensive across all sectors or limited to specific industries? Will it be permanent or temporary? Will there be conditions attached, such as requirements that Japanese companies source a certain percentage of components from American suppliers? These details will determine whether this is truly a transformative deal or just a modest adjustment to existing arrangements. The business community in both countries is watching this very carefully. Japanese executives have been making pilgrimages to Washington and to Mar-a-Lago, seeking to understand what the Trump administration wants and what deals might be possible. American business leaders, particularly those in industries that export to Japan or partner with Japanese firms, are hoping this visit produces greater market access and regulatory harmonization. Chambers of commerce, trade associations, and industry groups have been lobbying intensely to shape the outcomes. But the economic dimension is only part of the story. Defense cooperation is equally important, perhaps even more so given the current security environment in East Asia. North Korea continues to develop its nuclear and missile programs. Despite periodic diplomatic overtures and summit meetings, North Korea has not abandoned its nuclear ambitions. They've tested increasingly sophisticated missiles, including intercontinental ballistic missiles theoretically capable of reaching the American mainland. They've demonstrated hydrogen bomb capabilities. They've shown they can put satellites into orbit, which means they have the technology to potentially deliver nuclear warheads across vast distances. China's military expansion in the South China Sea and around Taiwan creates constant tension. China has built artificial islands and militarized them with airstrips, radar installations, and missile batteries. They've been increasingly aggressive in asserting territorial claims that neighboring countries dispute. Most concerning for Japan and the United States is the situation around Taiwan. China views Taiwan as a renegade province that must eventually be reunited with the mainland, by force if necessary. The United States has maintained a policy of strategic ambiguity, neither confirming nor denying whether it would defend Taiwan militarily, but providing defensive weapons and training. Japan has become more vocal about viewing Taiwan's security as directly linked to Japan's own security. Any conflict over Taiwan would almost certainly involve American bases in Japan, making Japan a potential target for Chinese military action. Russia's presence in the region remains a factor as well. Russia and Japan still have not signed a peace treaty formally ending World War II because of a territorial dispute over islands that Russia calls the Kurils and Japan calls the Northern Territories. Russia has been strengthening its military presence in the region, conducting exercises and developing closer military ties with China. The Russia-China partnership, while complex and sometimes contradictory, presents challenges for the U.S.-Japan alliance. President Trump and Prime Minister Takaichi are expected to discuss significant upgrades to the security partnership. We might see announcements about increased American military presence in Japan. Currently, the United States maintains major bases in Japan, including Marine Corps Air Station Futenma, Yokosuka Naval Base, and Kadena Air Base in Okinawa. These bases are crucial for projecting American power throughout the Indo-Pacific. However, they're also controversial in Japan, particularly in Okinawa, which bears a disproportionate burden of hosting American forces. There have been incidents involving American military personnel that have sparked protests and political tensions. Any expansion of American military presence will need to be handled sensitively. Perhaps instead of more personnel in Japan, we'll see more rotational deployments, where forces spend time in Japan but aren't permanently stationed there. Perhaps we'll see infrastructure improvements at existing bases rather than new bases. Perhaps we'll see greater integration of American and Japanese forces, with joint training, joint planning, and interoperable equipment. Joint development of defense technologies represents a huge opportunity. Both countries are leaders in various military and dual-use technologies. Japan has world-class capabilities in shipbuilding, radar systems, missile defense, and aerospace. The United States leads in stealth technology, satellite systems, cyber capabilities, and advanced weapons. By pooling resources and expertise, both countries can develop capabilities neither could achieve alone while also reducing costs through economies of scale. Intelligence sharing is another area that will likely see enhanced cooperation. Both countries maintain sophisticated intelligence services that collect information about regional threats. Deeper sharing of intelligence about Chinese military movements, North Korean activities, cyber threats, and terrorism creates a more complete picture for both sides. However, intelligence sharing is always delicate. Both countries need to protect sources and methods while providing enough information to be useful. Building trust between intelligence services takes time and careful management. Coordinated responses to regional threats will also be on the agenda. What would the alliance do if North Korea launched a missile that threatened Japan? What would be the response if China attempted to seize disputed islands? What about cyber attacks against critical infrastructure? Having pre-planned, coordinated responses reduces confusion and miscalculation during a crisis. Military planners will be working to develop contingency plans that outline who does what under various scenarios. Japan has been gradually loosening its post-World War. 2 constitutional restrictions on military action, and this visit could accelerate that process. Japan's pacifist constitution, imposed by American occupiers after World War II, restricts Japan's military to purely defensive operations. Over the decades, Japan has steadily reinterpreted what defensive means, allowing for an increasingly capable military that Japan calls self-defense forces rather than an army. In recent years, Japan has moved toward allowing collective self-defense, meaning Japan could come to the aid of an ally under attack. This visit might see further commitments to expanding Japan's military role, perhaps including participating in joint operations beyond immediate Japanese territory. There's also the symbolic importance of Trump meeting with the Japanese emperor. This isn't just protocol, it's a message. The emperor in Japan is not a political figure but a symbol of the nation and its continuity. Meetings with the emperor are carefully choreographed and carry enormous weight. This shows respect for Japanese traditions and institutions while reinforcing the deep historical bonds between our nations. These meetings carry weight in Japanese society and politics in ways that Americans sometimes underestimate. For older Japanese citizens particularly, the imperial institution remains deeply meaningful. Having the American president pay respects to the emperor sends a message that America values and respects Japan, not just as a strategic partner, but as a civilization with its own dignity and traditions. Let me walk you through the possible outcomes and scenarios we might see emerge from this visit. In the best-case scenario, we get a comprehensive agreement that satisfies both sides. Japan commits to a substantial investment package, let's say anywhere from $75 to $100 billion over the next 7 years. These investments would be spread across multiple sectors and multiple states, ensuring broad political support in the United States. Major Japanese corporations announce specific projects with timelines and job creation numbers. Toyota announces a new electric vehicle plant in Kentucky employing 5,000 workers. Sony commits to a semiconductor research facility in California. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries partners with American defense contractors on next-generation fighter aircraft development. In return, the United States reduces or eliminates tariffs on key Japanese exports. Auto tariffs are reduced from their current levels to something more manageable. Steel and aluminum tariffs are waived for Japanese producers meeting certain standards. Agricultural imports from Japan face fewer barriers. Electronics tariffs are rationalized. Both countries commit to working toward a broader free trade agreement that would deepen economic integration over time. On the defense side, both countries announce enhanced cooperation across the board. Joint military exercises increase in frequency and sophistication. Japan commits to increasing its defense budget from its current level of about 1% of GDP toward 2%, which would make Japan one of the world's largest military spenders. Technology-sharing agreements are signed covering everything from missile defense to cybersecurity to space-based capabilities. Intelligence fusion centers are established where analysts from both countries work side by side. Contingency plans are updated and refined to deal with the most likely threats. Markets react positively to all this news. Stock markets in both countries rise on the certainty and expanded opportunities. The yen stabilizes against the dollar at a level that helps Japanese exporters while not creating accusations of currency manipulation. Bond markets respond positively to the increased security cooperation, viewing it as reducing regional risks. Both leaders claim victory, Trump saying he's brought jobs and investment to America while strengthening national security. Takaichi saying she's secured Japan's access to the American market while enhancing the country's ability to defend itself. In a moderate scenario, we get partial agreements on specific issues but no grand comprehensive deal. Perhaps there's significant progress on auto tariffs because that's the biggest single issue for both sides. Trump agrees to reduce tariffs on Japanese vehicles in exchange for Japanese automakers committing to specific investment levels in American manufacturing. But other sectors don't see comparable relief. Steel tariffs remain in place. Agricultural issues are kicked down the road for future negotiations. On defense, maybe we get some meaningful announcements but not the full package that both sides hoped for. Japan commits to modest increases in defense spending rather than dramatic ones. Some new joint programs are announced, but they're smaller in scale than the ambitious technology sharing that was hoped for. Intelligence cooperation improves, but not as dramatically as it might have. Investment commitments come in below expectations. Instead of $75 to $100 billion, perhaps Japan commits to $40 to $50 billion. That's still substantial, but not the transformative figure that would reshape the economic relationship. The investments that are announced are somewhat vague, with companies saying they plan to invest in the United States over the next decade, but without committing to specific projects or timelines. This moderate scenario wouldn't be a failure, but it wouldn't be the transformative reset that both sides are hoping for. Both leaders could still claim success and point to progress, but analysts would note that the relationship remains strong rather than dramatically strengthened. In a more challenging scenario, disagreements emerge over the details and the visit ends without major announcements. Japan might feel the investment demands are too high or unrealistic given the current economic climate. Japanese companies are dealing with their own challenges, including China's economic slowdown, demographic decline in Japan, and technological disruption across multiple industries. Asking them to commit enormous sums to American investments might simply not be feasible right now. On the American side, the tariff relief that Japan is hoping for might be politically difficult for Trump to deliver. His political base includes many people who believe tariffs protect American workers and industries. Reducing those tariffs, even in exchange for Japanese investment, could be seen as backing down or selling out. Congressional Republicans might have mixed feelings, with some supporting closer ties with Japan, while others worry about anything that looks like free trade. There could be friction over defense burden sharing, with the Trump administration pushing Japan to spend more on its own defense and contribute more to the cost of American military bases on Japanese soil. Trump has long argued that allies should pay more for their own defense and for the cost of American military protection. During his first term, he pushed this issue with multiple allies, sometimes creating tension. If he pushes too hard on cost-sharing, it could create resentment in Japan, where politicians and citizens might feel they're already doing enough. If negotiations stall, we might see a more tepid joint statement that papers over differences rather than resolving them. The statement would emphasize the enduring strength of the alliance, the shared values and interests of both nations, and the commitment to continue working together on common challenges. But it would lack specific commitments, concrete numbers, or clear timelines. Diplomats on both sides would work to spin this as progress, but observers would recognize it as a missed opportunity. There's also the China factor to consider, and this is absolutely critical. Everything happening in Tokyo is being watched very carefully in Beijing. Chinese officials, analysts, and media are scrutinizing every word and gesture for what it means for China's position in the region. China is Japan's largest trading partner. Despite historical animosities and current strategic competition, the economic relationship between China and Japan is enormous. Hundreds of billions of dollars in trade flow between the two countries annually. Japanese companies have massive investments in China. Chinese tourists are important for the Japanese economy. Japan has to balance its alliance with America against its economic interdependence with China. If this visit produces a strongly anti-China stance, with explicit language about containing China or countering Chinese influence, it could complicate Japan's regional relationships. China might retaliate economically, making it harder for Japanese companies to operate in Chinese markets. Chinese consumers might boycott Japanese products. Chinese authorities might create regulatory obstacles for Japanese businesses. On the other hand, if the partnership looks weak, or if Trump and Takaichi fail to present a united front, it might embolden Chinese assertiveness in territorial disputes and economic competition. China is constantly testing boundaries, probing for weaknesses, looking for opportunities to expand influence. A strong U.S.-Japan alliance deters aggressive Chinese behavior. A weak or uncertain alliance invites it. The ideal outcome from Tokyo's perspective is probably an alliance that's strong enough to deter China, but not so provocative that it forces Japan to choose between Washington and Beijing. Japan wants to have good relations with both, using its alliance with America as security insurance while maintaining profitable economic ties with China. That's a difficult balance to strike, and it requires sophisticated diplomacy from both Trump and Takaichi. Let me address the broader implications for the region, because this visit reverberates far beyond Tokyo and Washington. South Korea is watching this extremely closely because whatever deal Japan gets, Seoul will want something comparable. South Korea and Japan are both American allies. They're both advanced democracies with market economies. They both face similar security threats from North Korea and China. But they're also historical rivals with unresolved grievances dating back to Japan's colonial occupation of Korea. If Japan gets favorable tariff treatment and South Korea doesn't, that creates a competitive disadvantage for Korean companies. Korean automakers like Hyundai and Kia compete directly with Japanese brands. Korean electronics firms like Samsung and LG compete with Sony and Panasonic. Korean steel producers compete with Japanese ones. If Japan gets preferential access to the American market, Korean companies and the Korean government will demand equal treatment. This creates an opportunity, but also a challenge. The opportunity is that Trump could use the Japan deal as a template for similar agreements with other allies. South Korea invests in America, commits to buying American military equipment, strengthens defense cooperation, and in return gets tariff relief and preferential treatment. Then perhaps the same model gets applied to other countries. The challenge is that every country has different circumstances, different political constraints, different economic capabilities. What works for Japan might not work for South Korea or others. Australia is another close American ally that we'll be watching carefully. Australia has been strengthening its security relationship with the United States through agreements like AUKUS, which will see Australia acquire nuclear-powered submarines with American and British technology. Australia also has a massive trading relationship with China, creating similar balancing challenges to what Japan faces. If the U.S.-Japan partnership deepens significantly, Australia will want to ensure it's not left behind or disadvantaged. India represents perhaps the most important regional player that isn't a formal American ally. India has been growing closer to the United States over the past 2 decades as both countries recognize China as a challenge. India is part of the Quad, along with the United States, Japan, and Australia, a grouping focused on maintaining a free and open Indo-Pacific. But India also values its strategic autonomy and doesn't want to be seen as simply following American or Japanese leadership. How India reacts to whatever comes out of this visit will be important for the broader regional architecture. The ASEAN nations, Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam, Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, Singapore, and others, are perpetually trying to navigate between American and Chinese influence. They want good relations with both major powers. They benefit economically from China but look to America for security assurance. A stronger U.S.-Japan partnership could provide more options for these countries, giving them alternatives to Chinese influence. Or it could force them to choose sides which most would prefer to avoid. From an economic perspective, this visit could reshape supply chains across the Pacific. Supply chains are the networks of companies, facilities, and logistics that turn raw materials into finished products and deliver them to consumers. Over the past few decades, companies built supply chains optimized for cost, which meant concentrating production in China and a few other low-cost countries. The COVID pandemic, trade tensions, and security concerns have made companies realize that optimizing purely for cost creates dangerous vulnerabilities. If Japanese companies make major new investments in the United States, it might reduce their dependence on Chinese manufacturing. Instead of producing components in China and shipping them to Japan or America for final assembly, companies might produce more components in the United States or Japan. This fits into the broader trend of supply chain diversification, sometimes called friendshoring or ally-shoring, where companies prioritize locating production in countries that are political and economic allies. This trend has been accelerating over the past few years, and this visit could accelerate it further. Companies want redundancy and flexibility. They want multiple sources for critical components, so that if one source is disrupted by pandemic, natural disaster, war, or political tension, they have alternatives. A stronger U.S.-Japan economic partnership provides exactly that kind of redundancy and flexibility. It creates a production network that spans both countries, leveraging the strengths of each while reducing dependence on potentially unreliable partners. The technology dimension deserves special attention because technology is becoming the central arena of great power competition. Whoever leads in critical technologies like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, advanced semiconductors, biotechnology, and renewable energy will likely dominate economically and militarily in the coming decades. Japan and the United States are both leaders in various high-tech sectors. Japan excels in robotics, advanced materials, automotive technology, and certain types of manufacturing equipment. The United States leads in software, artificial intelligence, aerospace, biotechnology, and many cutting-edge research areas. Deeper cooperation in these areas could create competitive advantages against China's tech ambitions. China has invested enormous resources in trying to achieve technological leadership. Through programs like Made in China 2025, China has targeted specific high-tech sectors for dominance. China leads in some areas like 5G telecommunications equipment and certain types of batteries. China is catching up rapidly in others like semiconductors and artificial intelligence. The competition between democratic technological powers like the U.S. and Japan versus authoritarian technological powers like China will shape the 21st century. We might see announcements about joint research initiatives, where universities and companies from both countries collaborate on fundamental research in areas like quantum computing or fusion energy. We might see technology sharing agreements where Japan and the United States agree to share certain technologies with each other, but not with other countries. We might see coordinated export controls on sensitive technologies, where both countries agree not to sell certain advanced technologies to China or other countries of concern. Semiconductors are a particularly critical area. Semiconductors, the advanced chips that power everything from smartphones to data centers to weapon systems, have become a focus of technological competition. The United States and its allies, including Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, and the Netherlands, control most of the advanced semiconductor supply chain. China is trying to develop indigenous semiconductor capabilities, but remains years behind in the most advanced manufacturing processes. Japan is home to companies like Tokyo Electron that make critical semiconductor manufacturing equipment. The United States leads in semiconductor design and has companies like Intel working to rebuild American semiconductor manufacturing. Together, the two countries could strengthen their position in this critical industry while making it harder for China to catch up. Energy is another area where collaboration could expand significantly. Japan, after the Fukushima nuclear disaster in 2011, shut down most of its nuclear power plants and became heavily dependent on imported energy, particularly liquefied natural gas, or LNG. The United States, thanks to the shale revolution, has become a major energy producer and exporter. American LNG exports to Japan have grown substantially over the past decade, but there's room for much more. Thank you for your time and attention as we've explored this critical moment in international relations. The coming days will reveal whether this visit fulfills its transformative potential or becomes merely another chapter in the long history of U.S.-Japan cooperation. Sanae Takaichi.